Hey everyone, I'm Alex and you're watching Big L Books. Today I'm here to do a book review of Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. And I'd like to start off with a quick apology that I know there's a lot of glare going on this book and with my glasses as well, so I know there's a lot coming at you guys and I'm sorry. But do you know, this book, it was $40 at the bookstore when it came out, and that is just too much to spend on a book that I did not know if I was gonna like or not. So that's what the library is for. And my copy is actually due back today, so I thought today's my last chance to get a review done, so let's get going. So Lincoln in the Bardo was easily one of the most anticipated new releases of 2017. George Saunders has built this pretty solid reputation, putting out these critically acclaimed collections of short stories like Civil War Land in Bad Decline, Pastoralia, and 10th of December. So I think a lot of people were looking forward to see what George Saunders would do with an entire novel. And it's definitely not a typical novel. I mean, for one thing, the way it's written, it is basically written in chunks of dialogue. So it resembles a play more than it does a novel. As well, it just kind of feels like an extended long version of a George Saunders story. There's not a lot of new departures here for him. He's still using his kind of quirky writing style, as well as he's using a lot of themes that he explores in his short stories. So if you're already a fan of George Saunders, I imagine that you would probably like Lincoln in the Bardo as well. I've only read 2 of his short story collections before, so I'm definitely not an expert on George Saunders, but this has been by far my favorite thing that I've read by him. I liked that he had the space of a novel to just go deeper with his characters and with the premise of his story and with the ideas that he was exploring. So for me, I think the length of the novel was a really successful addition to his writing. Lincoln in the Bardo is about the death of Willie Lincoln, who was Abraham Lincoln's son. And the book is written in these 2 interwoven sections. And the first section follows Abraham Lincoln and what he's going through as a grieving parent. And the second section is about Willie Lincoln and what he's experiencing after he's died. The first section about Abraham Lincoln is quite grounded in history, and Saunders has these chapters that are just made up of quotes from different sources. I'm not sure if they're real or not, I didn't look into that, about different events during the time and that just give you a bit more context about what was happening. So there's a chapter about this elaborate party that the Lincolns threw when their son was sick. We have some information about the early Civil War, and there's a chapter about what Lincoln really looked like, and a lot of these quotes are contradictory, so it kind of pokes fun of history and firsthand sources being wrong a lot of the time. But mostly this section is about grief and how painful it is to lose a child. And we see Lincoln returning to the crypt where his son is buried just so he can have another look at his son and hold him in his arms one last time. So we are dealing with a really distraught and emotionally fragile Abraham Lincoln. And it makes you realize how hard it would have been for him to be the president of the United States during this really turbulent time in history and to be going through this catastrophic personal loss. Saunders presents Abraham Lincoln as a tormented man with a great weight on his shoulders. Since he now knows the pain of losing a child, he knows that when he allows the Civil War to continue, thousands of more boys are going to die, and there are going to be a lot more parents out there who are going to be going through the horrible experience that he's now going through. The other parts of the novel about Willie Lincoln following his death are set in a graveyard, and there are many narrators in this section, and all of them are the dead people that are living in this graveyard. So from my understanding, Bardo is a Buddhist term that refers to this transitional stage in between life and death. So the characters that we meet in this graveyard haven't moved on to the afterlife, and they're still clinging on to their memories of life on Earth, and they're very fixated and obsessed with their past. The characters in the graveyard are given a defining physical characteristic that gives us insight into what their obsession is, or how they've been distorted by their life. So for example, the Reverend Everly Thomas has a really frightened face. So his jaw's dropped, his eyes are wide open, his eyebrows are way up on his forehead. So he's really scared about something, which makes you wonder why this devout Christian is so scared of moving on to the afterlife, especially since he should be going to heaven and getting his eternal rewards, but he's not for some reason. He's terrified. We also have Roger Bevins III, who is a man who chose to end his own life and is characterized as having hundreds of eyes and mouths and hands. And that's because he is obsessed with the sensory experiences of being alive and having a body. He's a very poetic character, and he's often thinking about just those minuscule moments of the little sights and smells and feelings that we take in every day. Reading about these characters made me wonder how I might appear to be distorted in this kind of environment. Like if there's something about myself that's exaggerated, or a certain element of my past that I've been fixating on. Because it's definitely not the dead that are obsessed with the past, it's also the living. The only difference is that the dead can't go back and they can't change anything, and that's up to us, living people, to decide what's going to happen with our narrative and be able to change it up if we don't like where it's headed. So Willie Lincoln is thrown into this bizarre environment, and most of the book is just about the different people that he meets in the graveyard, and it's about his struggle to remain there in order to wait for his father to come back for him. But there's something that's very toxic about this realm that prevents children from staying there for a long period of time. I'm not really sure why. I don't think George Saunders did a very good job of explaining that, but basically it's not going to be easy for Willie to remain like it is for the adult ghosts. So he basically has to like struggle to fight for his soul to stay, or he has to accept death and move off into the unknown of the afterlife. And for me, that is like the scariest decision that anyone could ever make. I mean, the stakes are so high, right? On one hand, I get that human consciousness is very limiting, and there's probably something freeing about dying and moving past it all. But on the other hand, there's something that's just scary about not knowing. So I have a lot of fears about death, and this book was an exhilarating read for me because I had to confront so many of them head on, and I really enjoyed the way that Saunders presented dying as something that is both terrifying and liberating at the same time. For that reason, I found this book to be such an emotional reading experience. I just really connected with a lot of what Saunders had to say about death and the afterlife. And I'm kind of aware that the ending was probably cheesy and maybe not that great, but I didn't even care because I was so emotionally invested. And when I finished this book, I was sitting in a staff room at a school during lunch, and I was just using like all of my energy to hold back from just like breaking down and crying there. Although when I got home from school, I just was like bawling for the rest of the evening because this book had such an emotional impact on me. I could see how this novel wouldn't appeal to every kind of reader. I mean, there's not much of a plot, and the narrative structure can be disjointed, but it just worked really well for me. I liked spending time with dead people. I liked all of the different narrative perspectives, especially when George Saunders would use these voices to explore issues of class and race in America at the time. So for me, I just thought it was a really imaginative envisioning of the afterlife and what that might be like, and it was just an incredible novel. I'm definitely glad that I gave this thing a read, even though it emotionally wrecked me inside, and I look forward to getting around to the audiobook next, which should be interesting. I mean, I've never heard an audiobook that has over 100 people in it before, and a lot of the narrators are very cool, so I think that should be interesting. If you have listened to the audiobook at all, please let me know what it was like in the comments. If not, thanks for watching, and I hope everyone checks out Lincoln in the Bardo.